Hey everyone, Dr. Brad here from drellisor.com, Kids Eating Broccoli podcast. And I wanted to hop on the video and podcast today to talk about a couple things. So a little bit ago, I posted an episode talking about ADHD and what could be the cause of it. And, I titled it something like, "This could be controversial, but watch it till the end." And I definitely got some feedback from it, which of course I expected. You put anything that you say controversial, people are going to have some response. So I wanted to just kind of address a couple of the commentaries that I got about it, and not so much specifically individuals or individual comments or anything like that. But what I did want to talk about is sort of the kind of the underlying context to the commentary that I get back when people disagree with my suggestions, my suppositions that ADHD is a modern situation that's caused by a couple things, but not in a large part what we're led to believe as far as the cause. These are things like people saying it couldn't, it's not caused by dietary things because there's no studies that show that, or they tried it with their kid and they didn't get the results they expected, or the idea that ADHD has always been around and that we only now understand it enough to be able to diagnose it. And really, all these kids that have it now, the same amount, have always had it, and we just didn't understand it well. We didn't know how to diagnose it. So I just want to touch on a couple of those things because, is that even likely? I think that is important when we start to look at some of our considerations and the ideas we have and the things we agree with and things we don't agree with offhand, where those ideas come from. That's what I try to consider and look at because, we live in this world of where you can prove anything you want to yourself. If you have an idea about how something works in this world, you can go online and you can find tons of data to support you, right? Whether you believe, that ADHD is strictly and 100% caused by kids eating artificial food dyes, you can find data online and people that will back you up. If you want to say that it's 100% genetic, you could go online and find research and people that would back you up on that side too. So I think it's important to take it down a level, and the other thing I would say is now that I've been so heavily working on and focused on the projects I'm doing around ADHD, I have really delved deeper into the sort of the online community of ADHD people, adults, and parents who have kids with ADHD. And I found some interesting things that I've noticed along the way, some that are surprising, some that I expected. And one of the most stunning is how often I find people are very attached to the idea that they were told by probably their medical provider or by the media at large about what's going on with them or their kids, and also taking the medication they're taking and that's the only option. And not to say that a lot of these people aren't well-meaning and haven't tried other things and find that the medication is what works best in their situation, but to take that and then say that that's really the way to do it and that nutrition couldn't help people or that couldn't be the cause of it is kind of an interesting consideration. And so I'm looking at it from the perspective of the idea that, there's this idea that we've always sort of had ADHD and lots of kids have always had it, but we just didn't know how to diagnose it as well. So some of the current statistics about kids' health are pretty shocking. And so I'm just going to go over a couple of them. But this is, first and foremost, this is the first generation in history. The kids right now, my kids' age, 10, 7, 2.5 years old. These kids are the first generation in history that have an expected shorter lifespan than their parents. 1 in 9 of them have ADHD. 1 in 5 have allergies. 1 in 14 have learning disabilities. And then in terms of obesity, if you don't think that's going up, you haven't been paying attention. From the early, let's see, where to have it written down here. Prevalence of obesity in kids aged 2 to 5 has doubled since the 70s. Prevalence of obesity in kids aged 6 to 11 has quadrupled. And kids 12 to 19, it's tripled. And this is, in basically about 35 years worth of time. And some of these things to consider also is that children now spend more than 7.5 hours a day in front of a screen on average, and that cancer now has become the second leading cause of death in children. 2/3 of all kids drink at least one sugary beverage every day, and at least 1/3 of all kids eat fast food every day. So, when we step back and we look at the bigger picture than just the condition called ADHD, we notice a trend, right? And trends aren't necessarily statements of causation by any means, but they can be very meaningful. And in this case, we look at all the other things around the condition called ADHD and how intimately related to chemical exposure, toxic exposure, and food in particular they are. It would be illogical to suggest that ADHD wasn't also in that same category, didn't also have a large component of its potential causation, or maybe not causation, because it would have to be a real disease. Like a flu or something, with a virus. But it's a disorder or a series of symptoms. That those symptoms couldn't be improved in many, many cases by dietary intervention, and specific dietary intervention. And the other thing that I hear a lot in response to these considerations and these conversations is that studies show that it doesn't really solve the problem. But I went and looked at the studies again and found that well over 50% of kids actually respond quite well if the study is done well and if the dietary intervention is done correctly. Sometimes as high as 70% of kids. So that would make it seem like the majority, actually, in these cases, were dietary related, not the minority. And so, it's like we look at this situation, all the stats I was just saying, and what's the cause of all that stuff, And you got to even in that step back a minute and consider that genetically speaking, we are, at this current time, the people that are alive right now, we are actually the products of a genetic masterpiece. Meaning this, like if you could track back all of your ancestors back, from your parents, grandparents, on and on and on, those were the fittest in the concept of survival of the fittest. So your genetics right now made it through all those trials and tribulations. Your ancestors were the ones who survived. Billions of people did not survive. Their ancestors didn't make it. But yours did, all the way through to you. And so what that means is that your genetics got better and better and better. And we are the products of the best human genetics has to offer. And that's just how, natural selection, evolution, all that kind of stuff works, or supposed to work. So if you think about it, that really doesn't line up with what we're seeing in terms of the health challenges, especially of our youngest people and our kids. So we really, really can't do anything logically with rationality except look at our environment, right? And you don't have to look far, right? There's toxins in the environment, in our food, there's pesticides, there's genetically modified organisms, there's plastics in everything. There's artificial chemicals, preservatives. We feed ourselves and our kids enzyme deficient dead foods. We have a rampant cases of leaky gut syndrome, leaky blood-brain barrier syndrome, which goes with that, increases in autoimmune disease, brain inflammation, excitotoxicity, nutrient deficiencies that cause neurohormonal imbalances. And the biggest exposure to all this stuff really is from our food supply. And the truth of the matter is that our food supply has been hijacked by the chemical industry. And, we've really come to a point in time in history where we have to empower ourselves. We have to take the time, the attention, and put the focus in to be able to study, to learn, and to understand eating. And it's not just a question of ADHD or not, though, that's kind of the topic here. But it's really a question of, survival of the species, truthfully, right? And so there used to be a time, a few generations ago where you could really just get away with eating kind of what everybody else ate, just eating like the food that was around. But we have departed from that ship sailed. You can no longer do that. If you do that now, you are destining yourself for a lifetime of chronic illness, disease, multiple medications, and a slow, painful death. And same for your kids. And how our kids are raised, their health potential directly influences and dictates how they raise their kids and the health potential of our future generations. So really it is up to us. There's no one else. I mean, the buck has to stop here, right? So kind of rambled off there a little bit, but I think what I wanted to really focus on was kind of the state of the situation, and that to keep our heads buried in the sand and say that things like ADHD are just genetic or they're just better understood now, so that's why we have more diagnoses when we see that rising rate of ADHD and things like the autism spectrum disorder and all these other neurosensory and sensory processing disorders, or to really look around and face the truth that our environment is a huge culprit in that. And one of the most direct and powerful ways we can intervene in our environment in that problem is through what we eat and what we feed our kids. Do not take this lightly. Do not assume because you know somebody who's tried it, or you've glanced on Google at the research, or you've even watched and learned and read from a highly educated, researched doctor or researcher who says that diet doesn't play a part in this. We've been told that for generations. Well, not generations, but we've certainly been told that for decades, that diet has no part to play in things like heart disease, even obesity, type 2 diabetes, cancers. Now, finally, people are waking up to that those things aren't true, so why not the same for the other? I hope you got some value out of this. I hope that this is making a little bit of sense to you. We're going to kind of keep diving into this, paring away till we get down to the nitty gritty, the roots of what's going on. So like I said, it's really up to us. It's up to us to make the change, to make the difference, so we can create a legacy of wellness for the future generations, not just our kids, but our kids' kids and our kids' kids' kids, and on and on and on. I want to invite you, if you've made it this far in the video, to join our Facebook community. It's called the Family Wellness Legacy Community. You can just look it up on the search bar up there, and you can find other like-minded people. We do special things in there and interactions and videos and so forth. And it's a great way to just interact with other like-minded people, myself, and other parents and other people who are interested in helping create a legacy of wellness for the future. All right, you guys take care. This is Dr. Brad from drellisor.com, Kids Eating Broccoli podcast. We'll catch you on the next one.